It's time for the Atlanta Falcons to gaslight the salary cap.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka the Serious Black. I was about to say the Serious Black. AKA Mr. AKA. I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for a very long time, formerly at falfans.com, RIP. Still going strong in this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And to become an everydayer, all you got to do is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we will be rejoined by Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta, and he will wax poetic about why Khalil Mack is his dream free agent signing. And we will also talk about some potential center options to replace Drew Dahlman should he walk in free agency. But we'll start today's episode talking about the Falcons salary cap situation due to seemingly the assumption that a lot of people are making that the Falcons have no money. It's like they have some money, right? They may not have as much money as other teams have, but they certainly are not in this situation where they have no ability to go out there and be proactive in that first wave of free agency like a lot of people think, right? It's not an ability to be proactive. It's a willingness to be proactive. That's a different conversation. But we'll start off, before we get into all of that, we'll start off with the news of the day, which broke around 5 p.m. Eastern time, where Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated reported that Kirk Cousins, met with owner Arthur Blank on Wednesday night and expressed his desire to go somewhere else where he could have a chance to start in 2025. And everybody's reacting to this like this is new information. Like, we've known for 3 months that Kirk Cousins has no intention of being a backup here in Atlanta. So we'll wait over the next 9 days to see if something actual real news breaks about the Kirk Cousins situation, because this is not an update. This is just like, okay, like, I guess he met with the owner expressing the desire to not be a backup that we've known for 3 months. So if Arthur Blank was just like signaling, like, I don't know what Kirk thinks about what, I guess we're making progress there. So Arthur Blank's up to speed, I guess, now. So we'll see what comes of this. Obviously, we got like 9 days before the Falcons have to either, do the thing or get off the pot when it comes to paying that $10 million roster bonus in 2026. So we'll have an idea of what Kirk Cousins' fate is going to be, next Sunday. So we'll see on that front. But let's talk about the Falcons salary cap, because of that misconception that they have no money to spend, right? They have money to spend. They're about $5 billion over the salary cap, but they can get under the salary cap pretty easily and create plenty of cap space that if this team chooses, again, it's a choice, right? That if they choose, that they can be proactive in that first wave of free agency, usually when money goes around. They may not be able to be as proactive as other teams like the New England Patriots, who have $120 million in cap space, but they certainly can spend some money on some select free agents, as well as retain some of their own free agents. Now, the reason I say all that, because long-held belief here on this illustrious podcast that the salary cap is a lie. Right? It doesn't mean that the salary cap isn't real. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. There aren't consequences and repercussions when you spend money. There are. But the salary cap can be manipulated. And as I've likened it before, you can be that toxic boyfriend that is gaslighting the salary cap. That's why it's a lie, right? We can manipulate it. We can be like, oh, you're being so sensitive, And look, we don't condone toxic boyfriend behavior in real life with real people, but, since the salary cap is an inanimate object, you can treat it however you want to treat it. That's basically what I'm sitting here saying. Like, there are no hard feelings. No one's going to come for you, crying to their mother for 3 hours on the phone because, they just got gaslit or whatever. You know what I'm saying? The salary cap's not going to do that. Okay. So I'm sitting here telling you that we can get all of that toxicity out of our system, just, being a little manipulative and saying some things that maybe we don't mean. It's like, we're going to pay that option bonus. in 2027. And it's like, I never said that. And then, like that's how you go. So, there's an easy path for the Falcons to free up about $28 million. And that would get them several, 23-ish, $22-ish million under the salary cap. They could free up about $8 million by cutting David Onyemata, another $19+ million if they do max restructures of Chris Lindstrom and AJ Terrell, which means converting their base salary into signing bonus and spreading that over future years. And you're willing to do that with those two players in particular. That's probably where you start the restructures, just because they're at the they're still in the primes of their careers, and kicking that can down the road for players that you expect they're going to play for another 3 or 4 years for your team at least is not something that you're particularly worried about when it comes to that. Now, the other restructures that the Falcons will potentially have to do, maybe a little different matter. Jesse Bates is another like $6.4 million, but really the two where you can get significant savings if you move money around is Jake Matthews. That's about $9.2 million you can save with a restructure, but I think the Falcons will hold off on that just because, they don't know how long Jake Matthews is going to be an Atlanta Falcon, hopefully for many more years, but they don't know that. And so that's more of a break in case of emergency. And then the last one is just really, what do the Falcons do with Grady Jarrett's contract, right? They could cut him and save $16 million, right? They could do a extension of some sort that is kind of moving money around, just adding some void years and dummy years onto the back end of the contract. And depending on how they structure that, that could save potentially as little as $8 million. It could save as much as $12 million, right? We talked about this before, they could cut him and then re-sign him. That's something that the Eagles did back in like 2023, I think, with Fletcher Cox towards the end of his career. And so I think we'll see some form or fashion, most likely, as we've discussed a bunch on this podcast yesterday, including with Jarvis Davis, of the Falcons. I think will probably try to keep Grady Jarrett and get him on sort of a 1-year cycle when it comes to just basically playing it year to year with him at the end of his career as we sit here today. So we'll see how the Falcons create that. But, that $20+ million in cap space that they can have is more than enough to re-sign some of their guys. And I think to be competitive in some of these markets. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about the salary cap that a lot of people assume is like, oh, when you see someone's AAV or that average annual value, that amount per year that they get paid, they assume that's the cap hit. Like, for example, like Trey Hendrickson, who clearly wants a $30 million a year contract for whoever trades for him. A lot of people assume, well, you got to have $30 million in cap space in order to sign someone like Trey Hendrickson. But the reality is, like, even though you sign Trey Hendrickson to a $30 million contract, you can structure his contract in a way where his cap hit, and I was playing around with Over the Cap's contract constructor earlier today, and you could get that cap hit down to like $10 million, right? And the way that I structure that contract is like, it would be a $10 million cap hit in 2025 for Trey Hendrickson. It was like a 3-year, $90 million contract, so $30 million per year, and you would have like a $35 million cap hit in 2026 and 2027. Right? That's a lot of money, but like the way that you could manipulate that money, particularly next year in 2026, is you could probably, move some money around again next year and, get that cap hit down to about $15 million. So you really, even though it's like $35 million in terms of cap hits today, probably by the time we get to that point when it's, time to play the games in 2026, you'll be able to free up about $20 million pretty easily. And so that's one of the things that you see a bunch of teams doing, the Falcons included. The Saints do that all the time. The Eagles do it all the time. And like, this is why, like, I always push back against the people that act like the salary cap is like this big obstacle and whatnot. And it's like, again, it's a lie. Like, you can manipulate this thing, and really ultimately whether or not, whether you can get away with being that toxic boyfriend is if you win, right? And like, no one criticizes the Eagles and all their salary cap manipulations that they do and have been doing for decades because they win, right? But when the Saints do it, it's like, oh, here we go again, and like, you'll have these people saying like, oh, Thomas Dimitroff mismanaged the cap, and it's not to sit here and say that he did an excellent job or anything like that. That's not my opinion. But the real issue that the Falcons had when Dimitroff, quote unquote, mismanaged the cap was not how they managed the cap. It was the fact that they had a once in a century pandemic that deflated the cap after basically, 30 years of the cap going up like this. And then all of a sudden this 1 year was like, boop. And it all was because of COVID-19, right? So like, that's really where the Falcons got in trouble was, COVID-19. Depending on what conspiracy theory you believe in, like, there was a Saints fan in Wuhan or something, or probably not a Saints fan, because certainly it screwed over the Saints. But, there was, somebody, some fan and some Panthers fan, let's say that, in Wuhan that was, unleashing certain things. Okay, we're not going to go there, guys. But, so like that's how it really went down. So it's like there are consequences to manipulating the cap in this way, right? But like, you do what you got to do, baby. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just like it's an inanimate object, man. It's not a real person. Be as toxic as you want to be, guys. It's really about winning and losing. That's basically the point I'm trying to make. Is that if you win, no one cares. But if the Falcons are coming off a 10-win season, no one's going to care that Trey Hendrickson counts $35 million against the cap in 2026. Now, if they're coming off a 7 or 8-win season, that's a different matter. That's really ultimately what it is. So, we'll see how the Falcons handle the situation. They do certainly need to be smart about their money, but more importantly, they need to win games. That's really what's at stake here. And so if spending money means that you're going to win more games, I don't know about you guys, but are you going to complain about the Falcons winning more games? I'm not going to complain about the Falcons. Are you going to complain about it? Are you going to call your mother and cry for 3 hours, because, he's gaslighting me, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going to do that. Are you going to do it? So that's really what's at stake. And so, the Falcons cap situation is probably not going to become a good one in anytime soon. If a good cap situation is you have, $50-60 million in cap space, because they got to pay Drake next year. Then they got to pay Bijan, and then they got to pay Penix after that point. So they're going to, if they're winning games and these guys are earning contracts, that's a good problem to have, is how I see it. You got good players that deserve lots of money and you pay them. And so you don't have 120 million. Like the reason why the Patriots are in this predicament is because of Bill Belichick running that team into the ground. But you didn't hear that from me. So I hope that makes it a little bit clearer how you can manipulate the salary cap. But if you're interested in some of the specifics of how these things work, I did a breakdown 2 years ago, Salary Cap 101. I'll try to remember to leave a link in the description below, but if you just Google Locked On Falcons Salary Cap 101, you'll find that episode that breaks down how the salary cap works and whatnot. And so, we'll see if the Falcons are actually proactive in free agency. Again, it's less about their ability to do it, and it's more about their willingness to do it. And knowing how Terry Fontenot and company have been, they haven't been particularly willing to do those things. And so we'll see if that changes, given the pressure that is on for them to win games this upcoming season. So we'll see on that front. But whether they're willing to pay Drew Dalman remains to be seen. The reporter will see what happens with Drew Dalman, but there are some potential options out there for the Falcons if they do lose Drew Dalman in free agency, and we'll break some of those guys down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that action than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in that action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets in a same-game parlay. Nothing we love more than a same-game parlay over at FanDuel, where you combine bets for, the Atlanta Hawks upcoming matchup, where you want to bet on over-under for points or threes made by our guy Trae Young. You want to bet on steals for Dyson Daniel, rebounds for whoever else you want, and whatnot. It's all available for you at FanDuel. You can, bet on who's going to have the lead at halftime or after, the first or third quarter. All of that is available for you at FanDuel.com. And right now, if you're a new FanDuel customer, you can get $150 in bonus bets. If your first $5 bet wins, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So it's unfortunate when it comes to the situation with Drew Dalman that the Falcons let Matt Hennessy walk out the door. He got scooped up by the 49ers at the end of last season and is under contract for the upcoming 2025 season for that, because they would have had an in-house replacement option. But, if only the Falcons had listened to some humble podcast host back in like October when he said, oh, like you added Matt Hennessy and Elijah Wilkinson, just cut Kyle Hinton and keep those guys permanently on the roster. And the Falcons were like, nah, man, we love us some Kyle Hinton. But, of course, that daily podcast host does not exist. He's living a fantasy. But, when it comes to the Falcons and finding adequate replacements for Drew Dalman, obviously, Ryan Nuzul is an in-house option. But as I've suggested already on this podcast over the last couple of days, I don't think the Falcons can just go into 2025 being like, oh, well, Ryan Nuzul's going to be fine at that spot. We've seen Ryan Nuzul start, like 11-ish games over the last 2 seasons. He's been solid as a replacement, but he's been not good enough for me to feel like, oh, yeah, I'm comfortable with Ryan Nuzul starting 17 games. I'm comfortable with Ryan Nuzul stepping in if Drew Dalman's going to miss a month. I'm not as comfortable if Ryan Nuzul's stepping in if Drew Dalman's not going to be here for 4 months. And so I think at the minimum, the Falcons need to sign a veteran center that has some starting experience, hopefully more starting experience than Ryan Nuzul does, to come in and compete for that job and let the best man win at that spot, in addition to potentially drafting somebody should the draft go their way. But obviously with limited draft picks at this point in time, we'll see how that all goes. But because of that, you can't, going back to points you've heard me make earlier this week on the podcast, you can't put your stock and faith into the draft breaking the way that you want it to break. It's a crapshoot and all that stuff. So, get that veteran in free agency, at some point, and there will be options. Again, how many of them are good options? No, there aren't that good options. That's part of the reason why Drew Dalman's price tag is being reported to be as high as it is, because drop off from him to the next best center in this year's free agent class is pretty significant, right? Because that next best free agent is arguably the Colts' Ryan Kelly. And the problem with Ryan Kelly, he's going to be 32 and he's got an extensive injury history. He's been nicked up a bunch over the last couple of years. And so, that's not a player that you want to necessarily, guarantee a lot of money, right? Like even if the Falcons were to sign someone like Ryan Kelly, there's a good chance that Ryan Nuzul is probably going to be starting like 8 games next year again. So that is a path the Falcons can go down if they want to put a premium on that position. The other guys that are sort of the top billing guys in free agency are Josh Myers from the Packers, Coleman Shelton from the Bears. He started for the Rams at center in 2023, so he has some familiarity with the offense. Obviously, it would be funny if the Falcons and Bears swap centers, because the Bears are expected to be one of the top suitors for Drew Dalman. That's been reported for like 6 weeks. And so, it'll be not a good look that the Bears are like, oh, yeah, you can have him in terms of Coleman Shelton. We're going to take your guy. So we'll see how that all plays out. But, another thing to keep an eye on is a couple of former Dolphins players, because we saw, Sean Flaherty, the Falcons assistant offensive line coach, was an assistant for the Dolphins in like 2019, 2020, and 2021 before coming to Atlanta. And we've seen the Falcons scoop up some ex-Dolphins at offensive tackles the past 2 summers, guys like Isaiah Prince, Julian Davenport, Jared Jones-Smith as well, to compete for those depth roles at tackle. And, that familiarity that those guys have with Flaherty, I think gave those guys a leg up. And so there's 3 centers that played for the Dolphins in those years. There's 4, but one of those guys is Ted Karras with the Bengals. He doesn't look like he's going to get cut by them. But the other 3 are Michael Dieter with the Washington, Evan Brown with Arizona, and Liam Eichenberg, who's still with Miami. And so Brown is probably the most intriguing of those guys, because a couple of years ago he did start for the Lions at center when Frank Ragnow was injured. He played this past year as, I think, the starting right guard or left guard for the Cardinals or whatever. There was a report just before I recorded that the Raiders are going to be cutting their starting center from the last 4 years, Andre James. So he's an option. Tristan Colon from Arizona is back up there. He was a player the Falcons brought in as a free agent workout like 2 years ago. He can play some center. Daniel Brunskill for Tennessee has dabbled at center in the past. Lucas Patrick for the Saints, Brady Christensen from the Panthers, as well as Austin Corbett with the Panthers. Austin Corbett would be a good pickup, but like Ryan Kelly, he has an extensive injury history. Cody Whitehair for the Raiders as well. He's a Ryan Pace draft pick. Began his career in Chicago, back in 2016 as a center. Hasn't played much there since in 2020, but maybe he's a body. The ideal player for me would be James Daniels of Pittsburgh. The problem is James Daniels is coming off an Achilles tear, so he wouldn't, you're probably not going to get the best version of James Daniels this year if you do that, but he is another Ryan Pace guy. Another guy is Robert Hainsey with the Buccaneers. He wasn't great in the 2 years he had to kind of start for Ryan Jensen at center, and they ultimately replaced him with Graham Barton this past year. But, he has some experience and whatnot. And so if I'm looking at this group of players, I would probably bet either Shelton or Brown just because of that familiarity that the Falcons have, the coaching staff has with these guys would be my two best guesses. Those guys you could probably sign on like a 1 year, $2 or maybe $3 million deal just to come in here and compete with Ryan Nuzul. And I feel like that's the strategy that the Falcons are going to basically be forced to have and hope that, it works out in their favor should Drew Dalman walk. But we'll see on that front. Obviously, we have a few more days. As I mentioned on yesterday's episode, if Drew Dalman hasn't resigned by Monday at 11:59 a.m. Eastern time, then it's probably likely he's going to walk because the tampering period will begin at noon Eastern time on Monday. And that was when teams will be allowed to talk to other teams' free agents. And basically, that's when the bidding war will start with Drew Dalman. And I suspect that we will probably find out by the time Monday evening on where he will be playing, and it probably won't be in Atlanta at that point in time. So we'll see on that front. But those are some of the options. None of them are good options or great options that you're like, oh man, this is a slam dunk option for you. Again, if James Daniels was healthy, he'd probably be the closest one to a slam dunk option. But coming off that Achilles, he's not. So we'll see what the Falcons do at the center position, and if they bring in some decent competition for Ryan Nuzul. And we'll wrap up today's episode talking with Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta. We had to punt on this segment yesterday because of the Trey Hendrickson news that broke just after we recorded. And so basically Jarvis is basically breaking down why he would love to see Khalil Mack as the Falcons' top free agent target next week. And so just keep that in mind that he's saying that before we found out about Trey Hendrickson. So, we'll see. But, because the Trey Hendrickson trade is unlikely to happen at this point, we'll see how it goes. But, I'm not going to hold my breath that the Falcons are going to land Trey Hendrickson. I think the Khalil Mack signing is probably more realistic than the Falcons trading for Trey Hendrickson. So worth listening to why Jarvis isn't concerned with Khalil Mack's age. So we'll get into all of that, guys, as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So Jarvis, everybody knows that the Atlanta Falcons are going to be so fast, so furious come Monday. When it comes to that legal tampering period at noon Eastern time, they're going to be making all the splash free agent signings to remake this defense and make it go from worst to first, right, Terry? Right? Yeah. And so
all
with
right.
that in mind.
All right, cool. Breaking news. Yeah, let's go.
With that in mind, since Terry and them are everydayers, give your best pitch for that free agent or two that would top your wish list that you would love to see this team sign, whether you think it's realistic or not. This is your last opportunity to make that pitch before the moves actually have to be made.
Man, there is a player that holds a special place in my heart. And I know this would kind of fall in the same category as typical person who watches the Falcons. He's been so successful, with a couple teams, several teams. He's 33 years old, 34 years old. Oh my gosh, man, if the Falcons could figure out a way to get Mr. Mack. I was talking to one of my friend of mine on Twitter just earlier today. And I think that we were actually watching that draft together, where the Falcons drafted Jake Matthews, and they were just counting down those picks, and I was like, okay, here we go. It might actually happen. That's how long I've been wanting the Falcons to get an edge rusher, by the way. To go ahead and say that. Oh my gosh, they got to that Falcons pick, and they was like, oh no, the Raiders came up at the pick. They was like, and the Oakland Raiders, whatever the name was back at the time, Oakland Raiders select defensive end Khalil Mack out of Buffalo. I was like, oh my God, I screamed so loudly. I think the police were called and it came knocking at our door because I was so loud when and so upset. But yeah, man, Terry, I need you to make me happy. Like I'm taking all of my take all of your personal stuff out of the way. Whatever issue you have with me and not listening to me when it comes to this draft stuff and edge rusher, deficiencies that you all have had for the past decade. I need you to hear me out, bro. I need you to make that phone call and see what it would take for Mac to put on that black and red this year and get another productive year because he just had one last year. You see the doggone charge, you know what I'm saying? Like, I would be surprised they try to throw a little change at him. They got rid of Joey. Like, man, Joey, get your butt up out of here, bro. Mac did a little something. Might bring back Mac. But, Terry, I need you to go make that phone call, though, and see what's going on with Mr. Mac because I feel like it's something still there. The dude can still rush the passer. Y'all saw it in the game, dude. They played the charge. Y'all know what it is. Like, so yeah, I think Khalil Mack and getting that veteran pass rusher, guy that that you can count on third and long, and you can go contend for the playoffs when you have guys like that veteran guys that have been around because you're going to bring a young guy in the first round because we know for 100% fact that the Falcons are going to draft a edge rusher at 15. Yes. We already know that's locked in, bro. It's locked in.
Put your entire mortgage on that pick.
All your money on it.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
We're not giving you bad advice that's going to ruin your life. This is 100% certainty. Man, it is definitely going to happen this year.
Go get that money, man. Go get that money. I promise you, go to FanDuel right now and bet that money. Bet it. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, you're going to win all of it, baby. So, yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, just follow me, man. Follow the Jarvis Brick Road. You know what I'm saying? Go sign Mac. You know what I'm saying? Go make sure you draft the edge rush in the first round. And then, man, you go bargain basement shopping, man. You know what I'm saying? At this safety spot. Strong safety, man. You know what I'm saying? Got Julian Blackman out there. You got Chuck Clark. He's played with the Jets, Y'all know y'all like people that are familiar. Chuck Clark, pay safety for the Jets. You know what I'm saying? Old Brick, he already got the scoop on him. So, go and fill that spot so you don't have to worry about bringing in somebody. Then the draft, you know what I'm saying? Then you focus on the linebackers, corner, and the edge. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? There you go. Yeah. There you go, Terry. That's how you fix this thing.
Yeah, okay. Chuck Clark also played for Dean Pease in Baltimore. So, you can get Coach Pease a call, get a recommendation or whatever, Can you, get some of those character, assessments or whatever and whatnot. So,
man, let's go. Falcons ethos.
I think you're right, Jarvis. Like, I think a lot of people probably look at Khalil Mack's age and sort of be like, didn't we just do this with Matthew Bergeron or Matthew Judon? I'm sorry, Matthew Bergeron.
Bergeron is on your mind. I need to find a show that you talked about Matthew Bergeron. I know there's a 30-minute show podcast on Matthew Bergeron.
I don't know why Bergeron, that Freudian slip. He doesn't need that smoke right now. Matthew Judon, that's my brain is like, he needs the smoke, but
we got to talk about him one day. I think that would be a very good
episode. I agree with you, Jarvis. Like, you just got to watch that game last year where I was just watching Khalil Mack just tossing dudes in a game, like, and anybody who's been listening to this show for any amount of time, any everydayers, knows that Jarvis, and his thoughts on Matthew Judon were not, he was excited in August. First couple of games, it was looking good, and then by the time we got to October, it was like, And so, I don't think you have to worry about Jarvis coming on the podcast next October being like, I don't think Khalil Mack is in shape. I don't think Khalil Mack is going out there and playing hard or all. Like, that's never been an issue with Khalil Mack. So I do feel like it's different in that regard. But of course, the risk with Khalil Mack is at some point, I don't know when it's going to be, but at some point he's going to stop being Khalil Mack. And when is that point? But hey, I sit here and I go, I would love to have the opportunity to see Khalil Mack fall off a cliff in 2 or 3 years in Atlanta, because we haven't had a guy like that in Atlanta pretty much ever.
The last time the Falcons brought in a Hall of Fame level player, it worked out pretty fine to me. And that was Dwight Freeney. Dwight Freeney came in here and he was effective. And oh my gosh, the effect that he had on 44. I mean, I know people like, oh man, it wasn't like he was out there pass rushing for him. Like, nah, man, but that stuff matters, man.
Little marionette strings or whatever,
Yes, man. Yes, that stuff matters, dog. I'm telling you, when cats like that walking in the locker room, it's automatic respect. Automatic. And I would bet a lot of money, man, that if the Falcons signed Khalil Mack, he would have some success. I ain't talking about you're gonna have 12 sacks, but I damn sure believe they can get you 6 or 7 easily. Because the man still got the burst. He ain't what he used to be. But he can doggone still be effective. And I know once Khalil Mack is done, 5 years later, that man got to be going into the Hall of Fame, bro.
Yeah.
Sorry. It makes too much sense.
When Khalil Mack puts his hands on you, it is a religious experience for the offensive tackle, because they will feel the power of God when he decides to lay his hands on you.
Yeah. They repent immediately.
Yes.
Immediately. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I ain't mean to do it. I ain't mean to line up against you today. I promise.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would be very much intrigued, as I always say in this podcast, beggars cannot be choosers. And so I would just give me anybody who is a halfway decent pass rusher, and it will be hard for me to complain. I mean, that was the whole conversation with Judon. Like, I saw a lot of the red flags with Judon, but I was like, look, what else are the Falcons going to do? Like,
exactly, man.
Like, what else are we
going to do?
Third
round pick, bro. Like, all right, whatever.
So hopefully we will see the Falcons walk away from free agency next week with something at that pass rush position, potentially linebacker, corner. Hopefully we'll see something, so that next week, this time, Jarvis, when we're talking, we can actually talk about some actual roster moves that the Falcons made and talk about some real progress that they've made on defense. But obviously it's going to be a busy week ahead for the Falcons and so many other teams in the league. So make sure you continue to check out Locked On Falcons. We'll probably do some weekend stuff this weekend, talking about some of the ways that the Falcons can free up cap space, maybe talk about some centers that could be targeted if the Falcons do lose out on Drew Dahlman next week. So all that is still in store for you here as your first listen here on Locked On Falcons. Check us out and follow us and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, if you want to take a peek to, maybe some of these defensive players at the Falcons, and certainly that edge rusher that they will 100%, no doubt about it, take in round 1. You want to check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Keith Sanchez and Damian Parson. They'll get you the scoop on some of those guys that you can keep your eye on. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.